Well everyone, let's go and take a look at the Samsung Galaxy S6 Edge and see how this specific phone holds up in 2023. Now, this specific phone came out in 2015, and what's crazy is that this was actually a very impactful phone for the most part. Unfortunately, it was just such a weird phone that Samsung made that I do think it kind of got a little bit overshadowed by its predecessor and its successor. So this one kind of sat in a really weird spot. But otherwise, I look at a phone like the Samsung Galaxy S6 Edge, and although it's not really worth buying anymore, I still think it was pretty impactful. And if you're in the market, please do not buy this phone. I wouldn't even recommend buying this phone in any necessary way, but I still look at a phone like the S6 Edge and I actually like what it brought to the table. But if you want to pick up some phones I would recommend buying this year, links will be down in the description. You can get it from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the S6 Edge, on the front, we did have a 5.1-inch Super AMOLED display. It was a 1440p panel, and it was a very good display. This was, at the time, Samsung's probably best display they ever made. It was a curved display as well, which was awesome. So this was a change in what Samsung did pretty much every year before, because this was the first time, I think probably the Note Edge was the first time, but this was the main first time on an S phone that we actually had that curved glass. And that was actually something crazy. For us to actually have that capability of going through and having that curved glass right on that display was actually really awesome. And that was something that when I was looking at this phone, it was honestly a very cool thing. Since then, they've added this type of feature to a majority of their phones, but now it's really only on their main expensive, mainline flagships. But it's still a super cool thing that I really like, and I'm really happy they ended up doing that. We have the home button on the front. We have the capacitive buttons at the bottom as well, and that kind of covers it up on the bottom and the bezels. Now, we do have a micro USB port on this thing. We kind of got a few things removed though, so we still have the headphone jack, which is nice, but Samsung ended up removing two very important things that kind of made a lot of Samsung phones, and that was actually with its, believe it or not, removal of the micro SD card slot and the removal of the removable back. So before this, we were able to go ahead and very happily remove the storage and expand the storage if we want to, and go through and pretty much, change out the battery if we wanted to as well. But with this, Samsung ended up removing both of those things at the same time, and people hated that. This phone still ended up selling fairly well, which is pretty surprising, but people hated the fact that you couldn't just go ahead and basically expand the storage if you wanted to, and you couldn't just replace the battery. That was one of the biggest selling points of something like a Samsung Galaxy S6 Edge, and Samsung ended up removing both of those things, which is crazy, and they did it at the same time on the same phone. So that's why a lot of people will look at this phone and not be super happy about it, but they want a different approach. They wanted it to be a more flagship type of experience. They wanted it to be more competitive against the iPhones, and I totally see that. I think that totally makes sense, but it's still a super crazy thing that they did here. Now we did have the glass back on this phone, which was beautiful. We had the camera on the back too. We did have a few things as well, which we had wireless charging, but overall, I think Samsung did a very weird. We didn't have IP certification apparently, which was another weird thing. And overall, I think Samsung did kind of a weird job with this phone. But I will say, it was pretty impactful. I think it brought a lot to the table during its time, and I think that in itself does kind of deserve some credit for something like the Samsung Galaxy S6 Edge. So, in terms of that kind of covers it up there. Now, in terms of the camera setup, this thing, like I mentioned on the back, had a 16 megapixel wide-angle lens and a 5 megapixel wide-angle lens on the front. Now, I will tell you, during that moment when this phone came out, I'm sure this camera was very good, and I'm sure a lot of people had a good time with it. But the thing with some of these Samsung phones during that time was that the UI was very clunky. This thing was still rocking TouchWiz for a while. Was not a fan of that at all. So the camera UI really wasn't the best looking thing in the world. But the craziest thing is that Samsung was actually able to go ahead and add so many camera features inside of this phone, it's not even funny. You could pretty much go through and use this camera and still have a lot of features within it that a lot of phones nowadays don't even have. So that was something that was always very surprising. And even though this camera isn't that good anymore, it's still very impressive that they went ahead and added as many features as they did. This camera though is very bare bones. There's not a lot of stuff going on with it. And it's not really a camera I would recommend people to buy anymore. It wouldn't be one that's worth bragging about. But I would say from the Galaxy S5, maybe it was a slight improvement. But for the most part, it was a pretty, it was a pretty good camera. I think the iPhone 6s during that year had a better camera, but still it's a okay camera for the most part, but it probably wouldn't be the first one I would recommend people to kind of look at. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there as well. Now in terms of the software experience, like I mentioned, this is probably one of the weirder aspects of this phone. So this phone started off with Android 5.0. It did eventually go up and get something like Android 7 or Android 6, and it kind of stopped there. It didn't go any further, which kind of makes sense. I mean, this phone was kind of in a weird spot, I would say, because, the Galaxy S7 was such a better phone pretty much in every way that having a phone like this, you kind of felt like out of place in a way. So with the Galaxy S6 Edge, this phone has, been unsupported with software for many, many years. So because of that, like I mentioned, it makes pretty much no sense at all of buying something like a Galaxy S6 Edge. You are much better off buying something like a Samsung Galaxy S20 or Galaxy S21. The S6 Edge, because mostly of its software experience, makes zero sense of buying at all. And this is why it just keeps coming back to something like the Galaxy S6 Edge, because it's just so outdated, it doesn't make any sense to buy anymore. Now, performance-wise, it does have that Exynos 7420 octa chipset with 3GB of RAM, and you have to remember, this was the more expensive version of the Samsung Galaxy S6. So there was the standard S6, then there was the S6 Edge. And for having a phone like this during that time, it's honestly kind of surprising because this was hardware-wise a better phone, but you were spending more money on that, the physical looking of this phone. Otherwise, this phone was already kind of, like I said, the performance really wasn't that great, and that's kind of what the problem is nowadays. But during that time, back in 2016, 2015, this phone was still probably a fairly fast phone. I think a lot of people probably enjoyed it for the most part, and even at that moment, I remember TouchWiz being a very, very bloated version of Android. I will still say people liked it, and I think that deserves some credit for this phone. So even though now it's not a fast phone, it's very glitchy, and the craziest thing is that we thought this phone was a fast phone. I'm sure back on Android 5.0 it was pretty fast, but it's still surprising when you come back and look at a phone like this how much we've improved since then. And that is a pretty crazy thing. So to kind of sum up this video, what I'll definitely tell you is this phone really is not worth buying at all. It makes zero sense of even looking at a phone like this. You are much better off buying a phone that is still supported with software. A few things. This phone has been unsupported with software for many years. It's very unsafe using a phone like this. In terms of hardware, it's going to be very slow. The cameras are not that good, and it's just an outdated phone pretty much every single way you look at it. But you are much better off buying a phone that is still kind of even supported with software. And that's why I keep recommending a phone like a Galaxy S20, and that is a phone that's still supported with software, and it's still going to be supported with software for probably like another year or two. The Galaxy S21 is still supported. I'd recommend buying that. The S20 FE, even if phones aren't getting the next full version of Android, they're still getting security updates. The S6 Edge is not even getting security updates anymore. So because of that, it doesn't make any sense buying this phone anymore. So in terms of that kind of covers it up here. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.